I'm very happy to be here. And actually, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Then I'm not going to use the microphone. I'm just going to wander around like a free person. All right? So I'm supposed to talk to you today about elections, but I'm going to kind of veer away from what you might be expecting. I'm not going to talk about what they were doing in the Senate House on the Roman Forum. I'm not going to talk about what they were doing in the Cyctus structure over on the Campus Martius, where, as you know, all the voting assemblies met, because I'm not really interested in that. As you may know, Senate meetings were closed door. Only the senators met there, and only they got to discuss the specifics of laws and so forth. And over where the voting assemblies met, they were basically voting yes or no. They weren't doing any discussion. They weren't having any input on the decisions that Rome was making as a state. So I'm going to talk about what Cicero calls the real voice of the Roman people, politically speaking. And that's what was happening at public events. Different kinds of public events. Some of them are very specifically political. The contiones, when actual politicians gather together their friends and cronies and talk about the specifics of the legislation. But the way in which those were run and the sort of discussions that were going on there are very similar to what was happening at spectacle events in Rome. And the late Republic is when those start really getting exciting, because politics gets much more crazy in the late Republic. As you know, in the late Republic, Rome has conquered much of the Mediterranean. And that process of conquering the Mediterranean means that all kinds of new people are in Rome, more new citizens are in Rome, and a lot of the people who had been kind of shut out of politics are starting to think, hey, we made this happen. We being like the businessmen of Rome and Italy who made the economic happen for the whole conquest of the Mediterranean, as well as the sub-elites, the common people of Rome, because they were the main body of the army. They're the common soldiers. And they're not getting much from the empire. They want more. They want input into who gets the goodies of empire, and they start to demand it. The elites of Rome, the ruling elites who have been getting all the goodies, who have been making all the decisions, are now also not as unified, and they're starting to take sides with a lot of these different groups. So things start getting much more exciting, and public space in Rome is actively being used for these kinds of discussions. So today I'm talking about the one in the crowd, and I wonder if we can dim the lights right here a little bit so we can see the images better, because they're kind of being washed out by the spots, and you don't have to see my beautiful face, you need to see these images. So I'm talking about the one in the crowd because there's always this tension in Roman politics. We mostly know about the one, the movers and shakers in Rome, people like Cicero and Julius Caesar, people who are actively making things happen, who are leading the armies and pushing the legislation and so forth. Because all our ancient authors are kind of writing sympathetic to them, focusing on them as the people making things happen. All the buildings that are left over in Rome, too, are likewise the monuments and structures being built by these guys. And they're building them so that their name can live forever, so that those monuments will tell future generations about the great things that they did. So our information is really skewed towards them. But the crowd is always there, always trying to control the ambition of the one. Keep that one from becoming too powerful. Balance off all the benefits he's getting. Reining him in actively. So there's always the crowd in Rome. Can we have the next slide, please? All right. And we can see this in a lot of the images. We've got an image of Aemilius Paulus on that coin up there. You can see he's huge. He's enormous in his toga, standing there next to the trophy, right? But there are other little people on the coin that are making it possible, because those little people are there to pay attention, to focus attention on that big guy. You say, wow, you've done wonderful things. Yay, yay, right? Always there to respond and to show how wonderful the one is. But they are there. They do have a voice. And they're very capable of using that voice. And some of the traditions in Rome get them practice in that. Religious rituals, for example. The crowd is always there to chant. There's a call and response thing going on, standard kinds of prayers that are being offered. And at public events, those patterns of talk by crowds are reworked to respond. Ideally, the great leader wants them to respond positively and tell him how wonderful he is and thank him for all the good things he's done. But they also can tweak those to say, well, we want this, and we want this, and we don't like this, to kind of invert, to reverse some of the praises they've been heaping on him. So there's always this tension. Next slide. We have the next slide, please. Okay. All right. And some of these events are very much focused to allowing the crowd to have its voice. At public funerals and at triumphs, there's always opportunity for groups of soldiers to kind of be snarky about their leaders if they want to use sort of sarcasm and rude jokes to focus on the leader too. So it's an opportunity for them to have this opportunity for input, to push back against the dominance of the leader. Next, please. Okay, and a lot of this takes place at spectacle. Spectacle in our sources tends to be about content, the performance. If it's a theatrical game, if it's gladiatorial combat, what are the gladiators doing in the arena? If it's chariot racing, the excitement of Ben-Hur and so forth. But for the Romans, it was very much about what was happening in the spectacle stands too. The people sponsoring these events, who were all the magistrates, the political leaders, the military leaders, wanted everybody's focus to be on them. They're the ones marching in the big showy parade at the beginning. They're the ones sitting in the central seat in the very front row. They want everyone to focus on them and say, oh, thank you so much. We love these events. We love this spectacle, and we love you. We're so grateful to you. We'll support you forever. But because he's relying on the response of the crowd so much, he has to pay attention to them. And it's their chance for them to say, well, we'll use some of the lines of this play and tell you that we don't really think you're the cat's meow. Maybe you could do something a little bit better. Or maybe we can talk about this other guy sitting on the front row who we really hate and let him know how we feel. So a lot of times these events are being diverted from what the organizer wants to what the people want. Now, bear in mind, the venue looks a little bit different from what you may expect. In the late Republic, the Colosseum, which is what you see up here, has not yet been built. They also don't have enormous theaters quite like this yet. This is a reconstruction of the theater of Pompey the Great. He's going to build this in the 50s, but it's going to be something that's a little bit challenging for the Romans. They do have the Circus Maximus, where all the chariot events took place. But the acoustics are not so great in the Circus Maximus, so they prefer to have a lot of their events in smaller locations, smaller settings. But they're kind of improvised settings at this point. Can we have the next slide? Okay, so this is the Forum of Rome. Approximately what it looked like at this time. We have a nice big open space here, lots of fancy columned buildings on either side, some nifty temples here, and over here is where the Senate House was. Right? Lots of open space that can be reutilized however you want. You can bring in props, you can bring in seats, you can make use of this for spectacles. And it's prime location. Everybody goes downtown. It's really a strong focus and has really impressive backdrops too. These buildings and monuments. Challenge is, these buildings and monuments were built by some of these elite leaders. So their names are written all over it. People have come to associate those buildings with what they have done. There's always going to be this opposing story going on with this architecture of downtown Rome. So whoever puts on a show there is always going to have all the fancy stuff built by other people surrounding his special show. It's always going to be kind of a challenge for him with that. So they'd set up stuff there. And stuff that might look like that. That's one of the temporary stage structures that they might use in some of these public events in downtown Rome. They also might make use of some other temple events. The big temples in Rome all have these monumental seats in front. And that's great to use for audience. And then you can put your show on in front of the temple. And oftentimes these shows take place as part of religious festivals that are dedicated to that god. So, it makes it more special. It makes it, makes sense in a way for the Roman rituals. And so those are conveniently usable too. Over here on the Palatine is the Temple of the Great Mother, the Magna Mater, and one of the major festivals of Rome took place in and around that temple that had interesting seating opportunities that these sponsors made use of. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. Romans felt a little iffy about seating those some of the time. There were various efforts to put in a permanent, very fancy theater structure in Rome in the 2nd century. And those were squashed by the Senate. They felt uncomfortable about having all this seating available for the Roman people. They were afraid of it for a number of reasons. They thought all that sitting can't be good for the people of Rome. It will weaken them. It will make them not good soldiers, so it might diminish the warlike virility of the Roman people. Also, it might make them Greeks, Those Greeks and their democracy, it's like mob rule. They'll just sit there and talk about radical politics all the time, and we can't have that. So at various points in time, the Romans refused to have permanent theater buildings with all their nice seating there. They can't have that. You can have temporary structures for these events, but no permanent seating on a large scale in Rome within like a mile of the capital city. Other things they were concerned about in these structures. Various points laws were passed that the first rows have to be reserved for the senatorials in Rome. All the powerful people have to have the nice seating down in front with the great eye view, right? And Scipio Africanus was the first one who proposed this, the conqueror of Hannibal. And the people were shocked. What do you mean all the best seating goes to those elite, fancy schmancy people? So the common people were angry at Cicero, and at various points in time, they try and push back on it. They try to resist the fancy seating going to all the wealthy ruling elites. So, the temporary seating thing is also being challenged in the 1st century. Marcus Aemilius Scaurus put up a temporary theater in Rome for his set of games in 58 BCE. But this temporary structure was made out of marble and gilded wood and columns made of glass. And the stage structure was 3-story like this. With those marble columns and glass and so forth. There were 3,000 statues set up in this quote-unquote temporary structure. So he was going to tear it down real soon, but this was a massive building, very expensive, really going to make an impression on the people who came to his games. Scaurus, good job, very impressive. We're so grateful for your generosity. Thank you so much. Next, please. Another person sort of testing the limits of this temporary setting for this interaction was Scribonius Curio in 52, who put together this sort of multi-purpose building. In the morning, it's 2 theaters back to back with these semicircle structure for the seating and then the stage building down in front. So they have standard theatrical performances in the morning. Then at noon, apparently, they rotate these buildings on some kind of enormous pivot, put them front to front or back to back, depending on how you think of it. And it becomes this sort of amphitheater for gladiatorial events in the evening. And supposedly, while these theaters were spinning around to this new formation, people stayed in their seats and enjoyed the ride. And people thought this was just amazing, but also reckless. These people spinning around and Curio causing the whole world world to spin around along with his structure. But still impressive, definitely going to be remembered. And Curio is one of the politicians who's on the side of the common people. The common people enjoying the whizzing in the streets and so forth. Next. Okay. So in the 50s, there's a lot of action going on in Rome. As you know, this is the time when Julius Caesar is in Gaul. So it's before the die is cast. It's leading up to the die being cast, and you all have this on your shirt, so you know what's going on there. But there are other people in Rome who are very much concerned about what Caesar is doing, who are very concerned about the common people and how they can be better fit into the decisions that the Senate is making, how their needs can be met. There are moderates like Cicero who want some kind of balance going on, some consideration of the people, but not too much. Let's not overturn everything. And then there's the old guard who want everything to be the way it's always been, with the Senate totally in control and not allowing the mob to have any kind of input at all. All the goodies go to the senatorial elite. And bear in mind, you know, this is really the elite in the Senate. Not all the senators are getting the same benefit from the pie of empire. All right? So there's some really interesting events going on in the 50s that show how people are remaking these spectacles to be an opportunity for interaction, to subvert, to shift, to change the original plans maybe of the sponsors of these events, to allow for a certain kind of radical response from a number of different groups. One of them takes place in the early summer of 57. And this is something that Cicero calls good games. He very much approves of this. At this time, Cicero's in exile. He's been forced into exile by Clodius. He's a big populist, very much on the side of the common people. And Cicero wants to get back. He's desperate to get back. These games take place at the same time that the Senate is meeting to discuss bringing Cicero back. And he's hoping that'll work out for him. We're not quite clear where these games took place, but they must have happened somewhere around the Forum because of some of the things that are happening in these games. All right, interesting stuff. Lentulus Cinther is the one who sponsors these. When he comes in the big parade and everything, he sits down, everyone's like, yay, yay, Cinther, oh, excellent, excellent, we love you a lot. When Clodius comes in, the mob turns. Suddenly all the spectators are booing and hissing and gnashing their teeth. Bad, bad Clodius. In Cicero's eyes, he's getting what he deserves. Then the play starts, and suddenly the play is starting to turn around this issue as well. The actors on stage are twisting some of their memorized lines to reading out reference to Cicero in this situation, reference to Cicero as the good father of his people, to how Cicero's house has been burned on the Palatine Hill. And chances are they were gesturing at the Palatine Hill, which is why I think it must have been on the Forum. Because there where Cicero's house used to be is this big monument to Libertas, to liberty, that's been set up by Clodius, right? So they point over at the ruined house, the house in flames. And that's an opportunity for the people also to hiss at Clodius sitting in the fancy seats. At one time, one of the choruses on the stage actually goes over and in unison point at Clodius and say, "This is what comes of your vice-ridden life, you evil Clodius there." So imagine, a whole lineup of people dressed alike marching over and pointing at you. This is what comes of your vice-ridden life. And everybody in the spectator seats around you, like, yeah, that's what happens, yeah, and interrupt the stage. I'm sorry, I'm sure you don't have a vice-ridden life. But you can put yourself in the place of Clodius, and others of you can see, it would be kind of, fun to join in. Maybe you don't necessarily feel that badly about Clodius, and she's like, yeah, you suck. Right. So it's being twisted away from what it originally started to be and used to really talk about a current situation that the Senate is deciding on right now. And we have the next slide. Okay. In the summer of 57, sometime around this, maybe a little after this, Another event takes place in the forum, and we know it's in the forum. That involves gladiators, right? Interesting stuff going on here. Caecilius Metellus Scipio sponsors this, so when he marches in, he gets a positive response from everyone. Oh, they're very excited. Yay. Supposedly some people are weeping in joy, you know. Oh, thank you so much for these games. We love this kind of event. Then Appius Clodius's brother, comes in, and he decides he's not going to come in with the rest of the fancy people. He's not even going to sit on the front row. Apparently he tries to sneak in under the bleachers, maybe over on that top part of the forum, right? So he's coming up from under the seats and sneaking into a seat, but it's too late. Someone sees it and it's like, oh, it's Claudius's brother right there. And they all start to chant at him and embarrass him. And we're told by Cicero that people are actually making snarky comments too about he's come in with the horses. Some of the gladiatorial events involve horses, so I've got some horses over there for the equites who used to ride them in the gladiatorial shows. They're also talking about how, oh, is this how you come to your seats? So this is the new Appian way, right? Because his name is Appius. But it's more pointed than that because his name is Appius, and his ancestor is, in fact, the one who built the Appian way back in the 4th century. More than that, sneaking in from underneath the bleachers, he's actually sneaking along the tail end of the Appian Way up there. So yeah, it's a triple kind of, well, it's more than a double entendre, it's a triple entendre there. And it's picked up by the rest of the audience. Ha ha, Appian Way, ha ha, Appian Way. So Cicero approves of these gladiatorial events and all the commentary that goes on. Next, please. Okay. Clodius is actively involved in a couple of interesting games around this time too. Also in the summer of 57, also trying to lead into Cicero coming back home. Clodius is actually an aedile at this point, so he's actively involved in official sponsorship of games, including the games that take place at the Temple of Apollo and the games that take place at the Temple of Magna Mater. And we're told interesting things about these two games. The ones at the games of Apollo are interesting because there's basically a sort of disruptive event there. We're told that there's kind of a takeover. We're told that all the supporters of Clodius basically come in at one point and push the other people out of their seats, that they sweep into the temporary seats. And because they're temporary, you know, it's easier to do this. If you're just sitting on the steps of a temple, well, you know, you don't have your own armrests, you don't have your own little seats there. It's easier to just push one person at the end and dislocate the whole rest of the set of seats. So supposedly his supporters come in from the sides and move all the other spectators out and just take over the games. We're told about the events as well that take place at the Megalesia, the Temple of Magna Mater. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay, so this is a reconstruction of the Temple of Magna Mater. And you can see there's a lot of steps there. They estimate that maybe 3,000 people could actually have attended these games comfortably. And they're prominently located too. Up there on the top of the Capitoline Hill and along the slope of the Capitoline, overlooking the Circus Maximus. There's also lots of connections to the clan of the Claudii there, which is the advantage for Clodius. You know, there's references to his ancestress, who was the one who actually established these great games. And again, it's an area where the spectacle is basically taken over by his sponsors, his constituents. Now, we only know about this stuff from Cicero, really. He's our main commentator, and he doesn't like Clodius. So he's always calling Clodius supporters, at best, shopkeepers. At worst, they're thugs, they're gladiators, they're slaves, they're the scum of the earth. And the sort of thing that they're doing at these games, the taking over of the spectation area, and chanting up Clodius and what they want and what Clodius has given them. Cicero describes as, you know, the blood being spilt of Roman citizens. He really suggests there's a lot of violence going on. Now, he says that it's a time for the Romans to get out their sponges. This is something he refers to a lot, that citizen blood is being sponged up off the streets of Rome. There's so much of it, they have to use sponges to wipe it out. And chances are people are getting bruised and damaged. I think probably lately, when they take over these seats, when they're being pushed out of their area, when the regular spectators that Cicero approves of are being sort of smushed out of their appropriate seats. You can certainly bet that the special seats in front being reserved for the senatorials, well, that's going by the wayside. They're definitely being pushed out of there. And so it's, again, the resistance to the legal reservation of those seats for the ruling elite of Rome, pushing them out of their place in the hierarchy. And so that's a lot of what's going on in the late Republic, trying to change what the hierarchy has traditionally meant in Rome, and trying to assert a voice and a will for the people of Rome, not just the Senate. Okay? Next, please. Now, in the midst of this is when Pompey is actually building his own theater. And he's getting away with it because he says he's really building a temple to Venus Victrix, Venus the victory bringer, right? And the rest is just a really very fancy set of stairs to the temple, and framework for the temple, and there's a stage building down there, but it's the backside, the courtyard area. It's not really a theater at all. And because it's Pompey the Great, he's getting away with it more or less. So he builds the first permanent theater in Rome where democracy could take place. The virility of Roman manhood could be weakened. And shows will go on, but importantly, it's a big shrine to Pompey and what he's done, right? So in all this fancy colonnade action up here are all the statues of the people that Pompey has conquered, the kings that have bowed down to him. Pompey recreates the world, and this is the shrine. And there is this huge complex. So in the central part of the theater, the stage area, the entrance for the king in all the plays, there's this reference to Pompey there. And opposite the whole garden area in the meeting hall of Pompey, there's this enormous statue of Pompey standing in that parallel place. So Pompey is symbolically looking down on every theatrical production that takes place in his monument. And he's more than symbolically, he's literally in the place of his statue, colossal statue, looking down on every meeting of whoever that takes place in that particular structure. And as you remember, that's where the meeting on the Ides of March took place in 44, with the big statue of Pompey representing him. All right? So massive theater, he's expecting it's going to change how events work in Rome. And it kind of does. But it also blocks out everything else for the spectators. When they're there, they can only see the theater of Pompey. They can't see anybody else's monuments. They can't see the Appian Way over there or the place where Cicero's house used to be. It's Pompey, 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 Pompey all the time. So it's a big effort by him to focus all the conversation on stage and in the audience on him and the amazing great things he's done. Does it work? Well, no. When the Theater of Pompey is dedicated in 55, lavish games to come. We know all about them. Very fancy, fancy things going on. Next slide, please. But he's undone by the elephants. There's this big elephant event. Never seen so many elephants in Rome before, right? And they're there as part of the blood spectacle. People are hunting them, and they're big animals, tusks, very tall and so forth. But the Romans see the human side of elephants, and maybe you do too. When you go see elephants, you think of them as not just beasts, but you find commonality. You look in their eyes, you look at the way they move. You maybe see on YouTube the way that they always, pick up their little elephants and put them upright, when they fall down and so forth. And the Romans kind of saw that too. They saw elephants as having human characteristics, being able to recognize human hierarchies and bow down to people like Pompey. But at these events, the elephants are getting hunted, And they're reacting to that. They're trying to help each other. They're weeping, apparently, and moaning their demise. It's like, oh, my friend elephant, and the trunks are going up and down. And the people turn against Pompey. He's no longer the guy who conquered the world for the Romans. He's the one who's killing the elephants. And that's how his games are remembered, The failure with the elephants. Oh, that's when all those elephants were killed. That was horrible. Fancy, schmancy new plays, all kinds of money being spent on venue and the games means nothing. The people turned against Pompey there, And Pompey was soon on the outs in Rome. Kind of a turning point for him in terms of his popularity. All right, next slide, please. And everything changes in the time of the emperor. So it's not just the building of the Theater of Pompey. It's not just eventually the building of the Colosseum. But the way in which these things took place in special venues that completely enveloped the spectators. There's much more interest in trying to control as best they can the audience at these events and to limit their capacity to change Roman politics through their participation in public events. All right, so that's what I wanted to tell you today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope we have time for questions.
What was our time?
We have 5 minutes.
We have 5 minutes. Anybody have a question? Voting, spectacles, public meeting spaces, really cool buildings, some of which exist, some of which don't.
So who gives you the right to build your building on the hills? Does the Senate have to approve it?
The Senate does approve these things, but they're pretty flexible. The people who tend to build buildings are the people who are victorious in war. So the victorious generals, the triumphators, are the ones who tend to dedicate a certain portion of their booty to this
Is like
kind of thing.
land private or public? It's public land on which they build a kind of public/private building?
Yeah, basically,
strange.
one of the tricky things is actually that building that Claudius built, right? Because he's torn down Cicero's house, he was appropriated that land, but his family's villa, or fancy townhouse, is next to that, so it's kind of connected to it. So he's building what looks like a public monument. It really dominates the visual aspect of the Palatine Hill, but he's used private land and private funds to construct a lot of it. And he's not a triumphator, and that's part of the problem too. Yeah?
Did Pompey try to get the public back on his side, or did he just give up?
Yeah, sort of, but he's kind of in an awkward position. And part of it is because he's been Julius Caesar's partner for a while, and Caesar's off in Gaul, so he's not there to help him out. And Pompey apparently thinks he doesn't really know what Caesar has planned, and politics are getting a lot more volatile. It's around this time that a riot is actually going to cause the death of Claudius, and Pompey has to step in to be the big policeman in Rome, one consul for that particular year. So he's also a target for a lot of blame when things go wrong too. So he's kind of in a no-win situation. The elites are always going to hate him because of Caesar, and the populists, the people are going to say, well, you weren't doing enough for us. You're trying to placate the elites too much, and you're trying to control us by suppressing us, by not allowing us to have a voice, even though you think we're going to be violent. So, yeah, he doesn't really regain his popularity after that.
And he sort of isn't going to live much longer.
Well, no, he's not going to live that much longer. He's going to die in 48. So, yeah.
How does Pompey die?
How does he die? After the big battle with Caesar at Pharsalus, he loses there. And he leaves to try and regain resources and resist Caesar another day. He goes to Egypt because Egypt actually owes him. He set up the father, the current king and queen there. Problem is they're having a civil war there. And the people who are closest to him, King Ptolemy, thinks, well, if I kill Pompey, Caesar will really like me and owe me a big thank you. So I don't really care what my dad owed Pompey. So Pompey is killed basically as he's stepping onto shore. He's assassinated by one of the legionaries that was left there to try and protect the previous king. So he was killed by a Roman.
All right, we better mosey on our day, because we have a couple announcements, but thank you very much. You have filled us with brilliant information.